Hi, everyone. Welcome to the episode 2 of the Grace Totem Podcast. Without further delays, let's dive into the topic, the demonic influence and spiritual dimensions.
You know how sometimes you're just trying to figure out why things are going a certain way? Maybe you hit a rough patch, or maybe things suddenly click.
Right. There's that feeling that maybe there's more going on than what we see.
Exactly. And today, we're diving into a really specific and honestly quite fascinating perspective on those, unseen forces, things that might be influencing our lives.
Yeah, we're looking at a YouTube transcript featuring Prophet Uebert Angel, and it really asks this big question: what's the deal with demonic influence, according to this specific viewpoint?
hmm And just to be clear, this isn't like a general survey of all spiritual beliefs out there.
No, definitely not. It's one particular take within a much, much broader spiritual landscape.
So our mission today isn't about saying if this view is right or wrong. It's really about trying to unpack the arguments. What does this source actually claim about demons?
Exactly. Where do they supposedly come from? What drives them? How do they interact with us? That's what we're exploring.
Okay, so let's jump in. The transcript kicks off with this pretty strong assertion, basically, that our successes and failures, they're rooted in spiritual stuff.
Spiritual interactions, yeah. It claims nobody is really independent of spiritual beings.
Right, and that spirits, both the good kind, angels, and the bad kind, demons were actually around before humans, residing in what it calls the heavens.
That concept of spiritual primacy really hits you first, doesn't it? The idea that the spiritual isn't just like alongside us, but it's the foundation.
Yeah, the bedrock that shapes our earthly life.
What happens there affects things here. And this idea, they predate us existing in these heavens. Well, that sets the stage for them being involved for a long, long time from this perspective.
Then it shifts into talking about dimensions, which is interesting.
Yeah, it brings up Paul's experience, being caught up to the third heaven. That suggests different layers, different spiritual realities.
And there's that weird analogy about God's hand. It says it's not a literal hand, but like a dimension of God.
Right. It's trying to explain something super abstract using a spatial concept. Like God's influence or presence isn't just a point, but a whole realm.
Okay. Try to wrap my head around that.
It's definitely a conceptual leap, and it leads into this broader idea of multi-dimensions. This is where it kind of diverges from, say, physics.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, science talks about maybe 10 or 11 dimensions, right? String theory and all that. But the transcript asserts there are thousands.
Thousands. Wow. Okay. That is a big jump.
It is. And it tries to make it relatable with a physical analogy, like breaking down an object.
Oh, right. Molecules, atoms, electrons keep going smaller and smaller.
Exactly. Down to particles, string theory, this filament of energy. The idea is that peeling back those physical layers is like moving through different dimensions, removing layers of reality.
So it's an analogy for accessing different realms.
Kind of. And it even mentions bacteria inside us, suggesting multiple layers of existence within one being, maybe hinting these dimensions coexist, right here, right now.
Okay, so we've got this idea of many spiritual layers or dimensions. Then the transcript connects it back to us, to our world.
Right. It says the physical world, we perceive what we see, hear, touch. That's the third dimension.
Accessible through our senses. Makes sense.
But crucially, it argues these other dimensions are beyond those senses.
Wow, okay. And that's why science supposedly can't get a handle on spiritual things, because science relies on observation, on data.
That's the argument, yeah. If it's beyond the five senses, scientific method as we know it can't really measure it. It sets up this separation between the physical and the spiritual ways of knowing.
And it also says something potentially comforting, that like pain and disease are stuck here in the third dimension.
That's what it suggests,
Yeah.
that those troubles are limited to this physical realm we experience directly.
Interesting. Okay, then the story takes a turn. It talks about angels arriving on Earth.
Yes, and apparently having this immediate need to survive.
Survive. Angels needing to survive on Earth. Okay.
It's a specific interpretation, and it claims they interacted with human women.
Right, the whole Nephilim or giants thing you sometimes hear about.
Exactly, leading to the birth of giants. And the motivation given is, well, pretty dramatic.
What is it?
That they needed to have offspring fast because they were facing some kind of impending disfigurement.
Disfigurement. So they rush to have kids. That's intense.
It's a very particular reading, And the consequence, these hybrid beings, not fully human, is presented as the reason for divine intervention.
Like the killings in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
And the flood.
According to this transcript, yes. Those events are framed as God needing to cleanse the human bloodline from this angelic interference.
Wow. Okay, that's quite an interpretation. And this leads to the main point about demons, doesn't it?
It does. This is where it gets to the core argument. Demons are described as being like one-dimension animals.
One-dimension animals. What does that even mean?
It means they supposedly can't survive on their own in our world, the third dimension.
They can't just exist here freely.
Not according to this view. Their only way to survive here is to inhabit a vessel.
And that vessel is us, humans.
The spirit of a human being, specifically. That's presented as their only viable habitat in this dimension.
So they're not necessarily wanting to be malicious at first, just needing a place to live.
That's a key part of this argument. Their presence is initially framed as a necessity for their survival, because they're fundamentally incompatible with our dimension on their own.
And that's why casting them out causes them torment, because they're exposed like a deep-sea fish on land.
Exactly. That's a good analogy. A one-dimensional entity forced into a three-dimensional space without its host. It's portrayed as unsustainable, agonizing for the demon.
So survival is the primary drive, according to this.
That's the initial explanation given, yeah.
Okay, this connects then to another point about God's limitation.
The transcript suggests God sort of limited himself from directly existing in the third dimension.
Which is why Jesus needed a human body, borrowing flesh from Mary.
That's the theological idea presented, yeah. To operate within this dimension, a physical form was necessary.
And then we get the story of Legion, the demon-possessed man.
Right. A classic example used here, the shift in identity, is highlighted.
From I am Mark, or whatever his name was, to I am Legion, for we are many.
Exactly. That's shown as illustrating a complete demonic takeover. The individual's identity is suppressed, overridden by the occupying spirits.
Legion meaning a lot of them.
Huge number, yeah, reinforcing the idea of multiple demons in one person.
And remember when they get cast out, they beg Jesus
to go into the pigs. Yes.
The transcript sees that as proof they absolutely need some kind of physical form, even temporarily, to avoid just blinking out of existence here.
That's the interpretation. A desperate need for any vessel, however temporary, to anchor them in the third dimension.
But then the pigs just run off a cliff.
Which is then presented as evidence that even animal forms aren't really compatible. It leads to chaos and self-destruction.
Suggesting humans are the preferred or only viable long-term hosts.
That seems to be the implication, even if their presence isn't good for the host.
Right. Which brings us to their intent once they're inside a person. It's not just about survival anymore.
No. The transcript outlines two functions then. Survival, yes, but also something more malevolent.
Which is?
To steal, kill, and destroy. Basically, to make the person's life miserable, make them regret living.
Okay, so there's the malicious intent we typically associate with demons.
Exactly. And it gives that really interesting example about a dumb demon.
Oh, yeah, what was that? A demon that can't speak.
Right. Residing in a person who can speak. But the demon actively prevents them from speaking, or hearing, or walking.
Why?
Because the demon lacks those abilities. It's like it imposes its own limitations onto the host.
Wow. So it's not just occupying, it's actively suppressing the person's abilities to match its own deficiencies.
That's the picture it paints. A truly parasitic, destructive relationship, hindering potential, causing suffering based on its own lack.
Okay. Adds another layer to it. So finally, does it offer any advice how to deal with this from this viewpoint?
It touches on it briefly. It suggests, interestingly, that sometimes just ignoring the devil might make them leave.
Ignoring them? Like, don't give them attention?
Sort of. But if they are actively trying to influence you or control you...
Then what?
Then the advice is direct confrontation. Assert your own will. Consciously choose what's right, rejecting the negative influence or temptation.
So you have agency. You can fight back.
Within this framework, yes. It emphasizes your choice and willpower as tools against these forces.
Okay, so let's try and quickly summarize what we've unpacked from this transcript for everyone listening.
All right. We started with spiritual primacy, the idea that spirits were here first and influence life.
Then the whole concept of multiple dimensions, thousands perhaps, beyond our normal senses.
Leading to the core idea, demons as one-dimensional beings needing human spirits, human vessels, just to survive in our three-dimensional world.
But once inside, their goal shifts to also stealing, killing, destroying. making the host miserable, even imposing their own limitations.
Right. And we saw how the Legion story and the pigs were used to illustrate these points about needing vessels and incompatibility.
And it's really important, as we said at the start, to remember this is just one specific theological viewpoint.
Absolutely. From one particular source, Prophet Uebert Angel's perspective, as presented in that transcript. It's a unique framework.
Definitely. So maybe a final thought for you listening. If you consider this perspective, this idea of unseen forces needing hosts and having destructive intent.
How might that make you think about maybe personal struggles or things that seem unexplained in life?
Yeah. Does it change how you view your own personal power, your agency, or maybe any spiritual practices you have?
It definitely gives you a different lens to look through, whether you agree with it or not.
For sure. Something to mull over.
And here wraps the episode of the Grace Totem Podcast. If you've liked the content, please make sure you drop that like button. Stay tuned with us as we deep dive into the topics, unpacking and unraveling them by subscribing to our channel and clicking on the bell icon so that you get notified when we post new content. Thank you for listening to us. See you soon.